When my phone buzzed that morning, I didn't expect my entire world to shrink into a few cruel words. The message came from our family group chat, the one that had been oddly quiet for weeks. I remember glancing at it while half awake, coffee in hand, expecting a casual reminder about Sunday dinner or Dad's new car. Instead, I read, "We think it's best if you take a step back for now." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they'd meant to text someone else, but as I scrolled, I saw both of their names above it, Mom and Dad. The same two people who once told me family always came first. My chest tightened, like I'd been dropped from a height I didn't see coming. I stared at the screen, rereading each word, hoping I'd misunderstood. A step back from what? From them? From being their daughter? I waited for a follow-up, some explanation, maybe even a joke. But the chat stayed silent. The little typing bubble never appeared. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't type a thing. I felt that strange heat crawl up my neck, the one that hits just before tears spill. It wasn't anger yet, just a hollow, heavy ache that reminded me of all the small moments I'd ignored. The quiet exclusions, the forgotten invitations, the way my brother's successes filled the room while mine barely drew a nod. I scrolled up through old messages, like flipping through evidence I hadn't realized I'd been collecting. Birthday wishes I'd sent that went unanswered for hours. Family photos shared without me in them. Little inside jokes between them and my siblings that I didn't understand anymore. Each one now felt deliberate. Like clues I should have noticed sooner, I thought. Of the last family dinner, the way Dad bragged about my sister's promotion but only asked me if my little job was still keeping me busy, Mom. Had corrected my tone when I tried to speak, laughing it off as defensive energy. I'd left that night feeling foolish for caring, telling myself families go through phases. But now, this message felt final, cold, calculated. My hands trembled as I locked my phone and stared out the window. The morning light looked too bright, too ordinary for something that felt so devastating. The city moved on. Cars, people, life, all indifferent to what had just collapsed inside me. I tried to replay every recent interaction, searching for what I'd done wrong. Maybe I'd missed something, crossed an invisible line. Maybe I'd been too honest about how left out I felt. I remembered telling Mom last week that I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. She'd sighed, said I was too sensitive, that not everything's about you. Maybe that was it. Maybe this was her way of proving it. Part of me wanted to call them immediately, demand an explanation, force them to say it out loud. But another part, the quieter, more wounded part, knew exactly what they meant. Take a step back was polite code for, you're the problem. It was distance disguised as reason. I sat there for a long time, my phone face down, pulse racing, trying to decide whether to reply. My throat burned with words I'd been swallowing for years. I'd always been the one to make peace, to apologize first, to keep the family intact even when it cost me my pride. But something about that message felt like a door finally slamming shut. Not gently, but with the weight of every time they'd chosen someone else over me. When I finally picked my phone back up, I didn't type anything. I just scrolled one last time, took a screenshot, and saved it. Not out of pettiness, but proof. Proof that this time it wasn't just in my head. Proof that the people who were supposed to stand beside me had instead stepped away. And for the first time in years, I let the silence between us stretch. It hurt, yes. But somewhere deep beneath that pain, something small and sharp began to stir. Something that whispered, they have no idea what they've just started. I've replayed old family gatherings in my head so many times they blur together. Same smiles, same laughter, same feeling of being invisible. Looking back, I realize how often I mistook politeness for love. It started subtly, in moments so small they were easy to excuse, like when Mom handed out gifts at Christmas, her face glowing for each of my siblings, and then turned to me with a sweater that was 2 sizes too big and said, "It's the thought that counts." I remember pretending to laugh, tugging it over my knees to hide how my hands were shaking. At birthdays, they'd joke about me being the quiet one, though they were the ones who never left space for my voice. When I tried to share good news, my first promotion, my apartment, Someone would always change the subject. My brother's latest trip, my sister's wedding plans, Dad's golf tournament. I became the filler between their stories, the listener no one really saw. There was one dinner that still stands out. My brother had just announced he'd bought a new car, and Mom's eyes lit up like he'd just solved world hunger. Dad clapped him on the shoulder and said, "That's my boy." I'd been saving for a year to buy a used one, but when I mentioned it, Dad barely looked up from his plate. "Good for you," he said, in the same tone he used to compliment the weather. The silence that followed was deafening. I remember smiling through it, pretending it didn't sting. But later that night, I cried in my car before driving home. Even at family events, I was always the one behind the camera, not in the picture. Mom would call everyone together for group shots and then, somehow, forget to call my name. Once, I tried to joke about it. "Guess I'm not photogenic enough," I said lightly. She laughed and replied, "Well, you always blend into the background." Everyone laughed with her. I did too, because crying then would have made me too dramatic. The favoritism wasn't always cruel. Sometimes it was disguised as concern. When my brother messed up at work, they rallied around him, saying everyone makes mistakes. When I struggled, they called it irresponsibility. Mom would say, "You've always been a bit sensitive." And Dad would add, "You need thicker skin." I began to wonder if love was something I had to earn, and no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. I'd sit through endless conversations where my opinions were ignored or dismissed. When I spoke up, it was, "Don't take it so seriously." When I stayed quiet, it was, "Why are you so distant lately?" It was a cycle I couldn't win. They expected me to be grateful just to belong, even when belonging came with humiliation. There was one moment that replayed in my mind after that group text, the last family vacation. My sister forgot to book enough hotel rooms, so I slept on a pull-out couch while everyone else had suites. They laughed about it, calling me the easy one. On the last night, we went out for dinner, and when the check came, Dad slid it toward me. "You can handle this, right? You don't have kids yet." I paid it, of course. I told myself it was fine, that I didn't want to start an argument. But that night, lying on that lumpy couch, I stared at the ceiling and realized I was more of a convenience than a daughter. Every memory now felt sharper under the light of that message. The way they made me smaller piece by piece, until I barely recognized myself. I'd been trained to see my exclusion as my fault, to be grateful for scraps of affection, to swallow disappointment before it showed. They'd made me believe being left out was normal, even loving, because that's just how family is. But it wasn't. It was control. It was a hierarchy I hadn't agreed to, one that placed me quietly at the bottom. And as I sat there, remembering it all, I realized that take a step back wasn't a new order. It was a continuation. They'd been pushing me out for years, only now they'd found the courage to say it outright. That realization didn't just hurt, it burned. But somewhere inside that ache, something began to shift. Because now, I wasn't just their overlooked daughter. I was the witness to every quiet betrayal they thought I'd forgotten. And this time, I wouldn't let it pass unnoticed. 2 days passed before I finally called someone. I'd been avoiding it, afraid that saying everything out loud would make it too real. But the silence from my parents had become unbearable. The kind of silence that hums in your chest and eats away at your thoughts. So I dialed Leah. We hadn't been as close lately. Life, distance, all those quiet excuses. But she'd always been the one person who saw through me. When she answered, her voice was soft. "You sound off. What's going on?" I tried to sound casual, but my throat tightened. "My parents sent me a message," I said. A group 1. They told me to take a step back. There was a pause. Then, what does that even mean? I don't know. Maybe it means I'm officially the family disappointment. Leah sighed. No, it means they're playing their same control games again. I could hear her moving around, probably pacing her kitchen the way she always did when she got riled up. "You've been bending over backward for them since forever," she said. "You help with everything, you show up, you apologize first, and they treat you like background noise." I laughed bitterly. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," she shot back. You've been trained to think it's complicated because they need you to believe you're the problem." Her words hit harder than I expected. I sank deeper into the couch, staring at the same phone that had delivered that message. "It's pathetic," I whispered. "I'm almost 30 and still waiting for my parents to treat me like I matter." "That's not pathetic," she said, her tone softening. "It's human. You wanted love and you kept hoping they'd change. But maybe it's time to stop waiting." I didn't answer. The silence stretched, filled only by the low hum of her breathing on the other end. "Let me guess," she said finally. "You didn't reply to the message." "No, I couldn't. What would I even say?" "Thanks for cutting me off politely," she snorted. "Honestly, maybe nothing. Maybe you let them sit in their own silence for once. But you don't disappear. You rebuild. Rebuild what?" I asked. "They're my family. Everything's tied to them." "No," she said firmly. "Everything used to be tied to them. You've been defining yourself through their rejection for years. What if you didn't anymore?" Something in me stirred, uneasy but curious. "You really think that's possible?" "I know it is," she said. "You just need to decide what your life looks like when it isn't measured by their approval." Her words sat heavy in my chest. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to imagine a life where I didn't flinch every time my phone buzzed, waiting to be ignored or corrected. But letting go felt like stepping into open air. Leah must have sensed my hesitation because her voice softened again. "Listen, I know it hurts. You've spent your whole life proving you're worth loving. But maybe the revenge isn't proving it anymore. Maybe it's finally acting like you already are." I swallowed hard. "Revenge?" She chuckled. "Call it whatever you want. Self-respect, transformation, karma. But you know them. They don't take people seriously until they're forced to." Her words sparked something small but alive inside me, the kind of spark that comes after a long, dark quiet. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe it's time I stop chasing them." "No," Leah said. "You don't stop. You rise. Quietly, gracefully, until they can't ignore you anymore." Her conviction lingered long after we hung up. For the first time in days, I felt something other than pain. A strange, simmering focus. They wanted me to take a step back. Fine. I would, but only to gain momentum. After that call with Leah, I couldn't stop thinking. Her words echoed every time I looked at my phone. They don't take people seriously until they're forced to. It wasn't anger at first. It was curiosity. A sick kind of curiosity that made me want to understand why my parents had sent that message. I started replaying years of moments in my head, wondering what I'd missed. It didn't take long before patterns began to show themselves. I remembered a few months earlier, during one of our family dinners, when Dad had casually mentioned opening a small investment account for my brother. Evan. Everyone at the table smiled like it was normal, except me. When I'd asked, half-jokingly, if he'd ever done that for me, he'd laughed and said, "You're more of the creative type. You don't really think about money." I'd laughed too, trying to hide the sting. But now, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized what that moment really was, a quiet exclusion dressed up as humor. Once I started looking, I couldn't stop. My mother's Facebook posts, all celebrating Evan's responsibility and maturity. My parents' vacation pictures with him and his wife, always captioned family time. I wasn't even tagged. The more I looked, the more invisible I became. A part of me wanted to let it go, to stop torturing myself. But another part whispered, "No, keep going. There's something they don't want you to see." So I did. I started small, asking questions that didn't sound like questions. "Hey, Mom, I noticed you mentioned Evan's new car. That's amazing." "Did he trade in his old one?" She replied quickly. "Oh, we helped him out a bit. You know how expensive things are these days." That word, we. I opened my laptop and started going through old messages, group chats, even bank statements I still had from when I'd helped with Dad's retirement paperwork years ago. I remembered he'd asked me to double-check the math, but never told me what for. Now I scrolled through the spreadsheets, line by line, until something caught my eye. A recurring transfer labeled Trust Pre-Distribution, E-L-E-L, Evan's initials. My breath caught. It had been going on for years, quietly, regularly. That night I barely slept. My mind replayed every time I'd been told, "There's not enough," or "maybe later." Every time my parents made me feel childish for asking for help, while apparently funding my brother's adult life in secret. But it wasn't just money. The exclusion was social, emotional, systematic. Invitations to family-only gatherings that somehow always happened when I was busy. Photos I never knew were taken. Stories I was never told. It wasn't neglect anymore. It was deliberate erasure. The next morning, I called my cousin Marissa, the one who always overshared. "Hey," I said lightly, "just catching up. How was that anniversary dinner for Mom and Dad last week?" Her hesitation was telling. "Oh, it was nice. Evan organized it. Everyone came. Everyone? Well, almost everyone. I think they just assumed you were busy." Assumed. That word burned. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I finally saw it clearly. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being managed, controlled, quietly pushed out of the family's narrative until my absence looked like a choice. For years, I'd thought I was too sensitive, too emotional, but maybe I'd just been the only one paying attention. By evening, I'd pieced enough together to know it wasn't paranoia, it was strategy. My parents had been quietly rewriting the story of our family, and in their version, I was a background character, the unstable one, the one who needed to take a step back. The realization didn't break me. It clarified me. If they'd spent all this time underestimating me, they were about to see what that mistake would cost. The next morning, something inside me shifted. The ache was still there, the grief of being erased by the people who were supposed to love me. But it had cooled into something sharper, calculated, controlled. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. I started small, intentional. I didn't want them to see it coming. If they thought I was taking a step back, I would let them believe it, while I quietly built something they couldn't ignore. My first move was professional. For years, I'd downplayed my career. Freelance projects, small wins, consulting gigs that never made it into family conversations because, well, no one asked. But I'd been sitting on something real. A proposal I'd written for a client that had the potential to expand into a full-time contract. I'd been too afraid to send it, afraid of rejection. Now, fear felt irrelevant. I hit send. Then, I called Leah. "I'm done being the quiet one," I told her. They didn't know who they were messing with. She laughed, a low, proud sound. There she is. It felt good to say it, defiant, but not desperate. Because this wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about reclaiming narrative control. If my family wanted to treat me like I was the weak link, I'd make success my answer. Not words. Results. I began showing up differently. I upgraded my wardrobe. Nothing flashy, just refined. I posted more intentionally on social media, sharing milestones I'd usually downplay. A new collaboration, a conference invite, a subtle flex about traveling for work. No captions dripping with bitterness, just calm confidence, and people noticed. Within weeks, old acquaintances started messaging me again. "Saw your name mentioned in that article? Congrats. Didn't know you were consulting with them." Every message fueled something that had long been starved, validation that didn't rely on my family's approval. Of course, my parents noticed too. My mother texted me one afternoon. "Saw your LinkedIn update. Looks like you're busy these days." The tone was clipped, polite, like she didn't know where to place me anymore. I replied, "Yeah, it's been a good year. Hope you're both doing well." Short, unemotional, strategic. It was strange how quiet confidence unsettled them more than confrontation ever had. I wasn't begging for recognition anymore. I was acting like someone who didn't need it. And that, apparently, was threatening. Meanwhile, I started connecting dots they didn't think I could. I reviewed old documents, traced trust fund details, even contacted an old accountant my father once used. The more I discovered, the clearer the picture became. Financial favoritism, hidden assets, years of manipulation masked as parental guidance, but I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I turned the information into leverage, quietly preparing my own version of the truth. If they'd built a narrative that I was unstable, I'd dismantle it piece by piece through evidence, composure, and timing. At night, I'd lie awake thinking about the years I'd wasted trying to earn their approval. Now, I wanted something different. Not revenge, exactly, but visibility. To make them see that I wasn't disposable, that I had power they'd never accounted for. Leah called it poetic justice. I called it balance. By the third week, the shifts were undeniable. Evan's wife started commenting on my posts. My father sent a cautious, proud of you text, followed by a question about whether I was still freelancing. My mother called once, pretending it was accidental, then stayed on the line a little too long. I smiled through every moment. They were trying to reevaluate my worth, but this time, I was the one writing the script. They thought they'd sidelined me. They thought I'd shrink. But instead, I'd learned something they never expected. Silence can be a strategy. And deep down, I could sense the next chapter forming, inevitable and fierce. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. The first time I realized things were shifting for real was at work. My proposal, the one I'd hesitated to send, had turned into a full partnership offer. The client wanted me to lead a project, not just contribute. For years, I'd felt like the quiet one in every room, the one doing the heavy lifting while others took the spotlight. But now, the light was finally turning toward me. Recognition came subtly at first. A feature in a professional newsletter, a speaking invite at a conference, a LinkedIn post that blew up with likes and comments. It wasn't viral fame, it was credibility. Real, earned respect. I didn't flaunt it. I just let it exist, visible enough for those who once overlooked me to notice. One afternoon, I received an email with the subject line, "Payment Confirmation." My hands trembled when I opened it. A delayed consulting payment from months ago that I'd completely forgotten about. A significant amount, enough to pay off a loan and still have cushion. For the first time in years, I had financial breathing room. Not family charity, not leftovers, not dependence. Freedom. I didn't tell anyone. I just started making moves quietly. I invested a portion, upgraded my apartment with subtle elegance, and replaced my old, worn-out car. Nothing extravagant, but symbolic. Every new item felt like a small declaration. I did this on my own. Then came the real test, my parents' anniversary party. I hadn't been invited directly. My mother posted about it online, assuming I'd see and stay away. But this time, I didn't shrink. I bought a dress that made me feel powerful, refined. Simple lines, expensive fabric, understated luxury. As I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Calm, poised, no longer the girl who begged to belong. When I walked into the event, the chatter faltered. My father's colleagues paused mid-conversation. My mother's smile froze for half a second before she forced it back into place. And my brother, the golden one, blinked twice before saying, "Wow, you look different." Different. That word landed like a quiet victory. I smiled politely. It's been a good year. Throughout the evening, people who once dismissed me were suddenly attentive, asking about my work, congratulating me on the feature they'd happened to see. My parents tried to act natural, but I saw the glances between them, the silent calculation. They didn't recognize me, not just the new look, but the energy. I wasn't seeking approval anymore. I was the storm they didn't see forming. At one point, My mother leaned in and whispered, "You should have told us you were coming." I met her gaze evenly. "I wanted to surprise you." She didn't respond, just sipped her wine and pretended not to notice the subtle ripple of admiration around us. Later that night, I stepped out onto the balcony, overlooking the garden lights. My phone buzzed, a message from Leah. "You're trending, by the way." She sent a link. Someone at the conference had posted a clip of my talk, and it was gaining traction fast. The comments filled with praise, people quoting me. I laughed softly to myself. It wasn't just luck, it was alignment. For the first time, everything I'd worked for was converging: skill, timing, and confidence. Inside, my family mingled as if nothing had changed, but I could feel the current shifting beneath their small talk. They didn't know what to make of me anymore. Not the failure, not the quiet disappointment. Something else, something they couldn't control. As I left that night, my father caught my arm gently. "Proud of you," he said again. It sounded less like pride this time, and more like concern. I smiled. "You'll want to be." Because in that moment, I knew. The balance was tipping. They thought I'd come to seek their approval, but I'd actually come to reclaim my presence. And as the doors closed behind me, the thought echoed. Steady and sure, I walked into the family event and they didn't recognize me. It happened 2 weeks after the anniversary party. My father called, suggesting we clear the air. His tone was calm, diplomatic, the same way he used to sound before announcing decisions he'd already made. I agreed, not out of obedience this time, but curiosity. When I arrived at the house, it felt smaller than I remembered. Maybe I'd just outgrown the way I used to shrink inside it. My mother was in the kitchen, pretending to busy herself with dishes. My brother, Evan, was already there, leaning on the counter like a self-appointed moderator. Dad gestured to the sofa. "We've been worried about you," he began. I smiled tightly. "Really? Because last I checked, you asked me to take a step back. That's not worry. That's exile." My mother's jaw tensed. "You know we didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" My voice was steady, but my pulse pounded in my ears. "You sent a group text telling me I wasn't welcome. You replaced me in family plans. You let everyone think I was unstable because it made you comfortable." Evan scoffed. "Oh, come on. You're overreacting. You've always taken things too personally." Something snapped. "You mean like when Mom forgot my birthday for 3 years straight but threw you a week-long trip to Cabo? Or when Dad told me I wasn't ready for my inheritance but somehow trusted you to manage yours? Tell me, Evan, how much of my share did you manage to keep for yourself?" He stiffened, color draining from his face. My father's voice dropped. "That's enough. You don't understand the full picture." I laughed, sharp, humorless. "No, Dad, for once I do. I've been going through records, taxes, transfers. You moved funds under Evan's name years ago. Said it was for convenience. You made me sign papers. I didn't even realize we're waiving my claim." Silence. The kind that stretches, heavy and undeniable. Mom turned pale. "Who told you that?" "Your accountant," I said quietly. He didn't even realize I wasn't supposed to know. Evan tried to recover, but his voice cracked. "You're twisting things. You were struggling back then. We were protecting you." "Protecting me?" I took a step forward. "You humiliated me. You made me beg for help while sitting on money that was rightfully mine. You made me believe I was the family disappointment so you could feel like heroes." Dad stood abruptly. "Watch your tone. We've done everything for you." "No," I said, meeting his glare. "You did everything to me. And for years I let it happen because I wanted to belong. I thought if I worked hard enough, earned enough, maybe you'd finally see me. But you only see what serves you." The words hung there, raw and electric. My mother started to cry softly, not guilt, but fear. "Fear of exposure," Evan muttered. "You don't know what you're doing." "Oh, I do," I said, my voice calm now. "And this isn't about money anymore. It's about truth." For the first time, they didn't have an answer. The balance of power had shifted so fast they couldn't find their footing. I picked up my coat, pausing at the doorway. "You wanted me to take a step back," I said softly. "Congratulations, I did. And from here, the view's a lot clearer." As I left, I heard my father's voice behind me. Low, furious, panicked. "You're making a mistake." I didn't turn around. "Maybe," I said, opening the door. "But it's finally my mistake to make." Outside, the air felt sharp, liberating. I knew the next step wouldn't just be about confronting them. It would be about showing the world what they'd tried to hide, and that realization that they no longer held control was the most satisfying silence of all. I didn't sleep much after that confrontation. The house felt like a ghost I'd finally walked out of, but the echoes stayed with me. My father's threats, my mother's trembling silence, Evan's nervous denial. For years, I had been the one carrying shame. Now I understood it had never belonged to me. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I'd always assumed my father's power came from money, but I realized it came from perception, the illusion that he was untouchable. So if perception was his armor, I would dismantle it, piece by piece, in plain sight. It began with the charity gala. Every year, my parents hosted it under the banner of the Whitmore Foundation, their pride and joy. Evan helped coordinate sponsors, and my father delivered a long-winded speech about integrity, family, and legacy. I'd always been excluded, told it was a business event, too sophisticated for someone still finding herself. But this year, the foundation's main sponsor happened to be my new client, the same company that had given me the partnership. They'd invited me personally as their guest of honor. When I saw my name printed on the official guest list beside theirs, I almost laughed. Fate had a sense of irony. I arrived alone, calm, radiant in an emerald gown that commanded quiet respect. Cameras flashed as I stepped onto the red carpet. For the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I was the storm at the center. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with polite chatter. My father stood near the stage, greeting donors. The moment his eyes met mine, the color drained from his face. Evan's jaw tightened. My mother clutched her glass so hard her knuckles turned white. "Didn't expect to see you here," Evan said through clenched teeth when I approached. "I was invited," I said simply, "by the sponsors." He glanced nervously toward our father. "You should leave before you embarrass yourself," I smiled. "Oh, I think I'll stay." When the speeches began, my father took the stage as usual. His voice carried that rehearsed authority, the same tone that used to silence me as a child. But this time, I wasn't listening. I was preparing. Midway through his monologue about trust and transparency, the event coordinator approached me quietly. "You'll be up right after Mr. Whitmore," she said. He didn't know I was part of the lineup. As he stepped down to polite applause, I walked past him, heels clicking against the marble floor. The murmurs started immediately, recognition rippling through the crowd as my name appeared on the big screen. "Please welcome Ms. Whitmore, lead consultant for Meridian Partners." My father froze. Evan looked as though he might faint. I took the microphone. "Good evening. Tonight's theme is integrity in leadership. I was asked to share a few words on what that truly means, not just in business, but in family legacies." The silence that followed was electric. I spoke clearly, deliberately, about how integrity isn't inherited through last names or wealth, but earned through accountability, about how transparency begins at home, with fairness, honesty, and trust. I didn't need to name names. Everyone in that room could feel the tension radiating toward the front table. When I mentioned the importance of giving every member of a family equal opportunity, not just the golden few, a visible shift spread across the audience. A few donors even nodded. One whispered something to another, eyes flicking toward my father. By the time I finished, the applause was thunderous, genuine, not polite. My parents didn't move. Evan stared at the floor. Later, during the silent auction, I made my next move. A piece of property appeared on the screen. A historic lake house listed under Whitmore Holdings. My father's pride. The starting bid was modest. When the announcer asked for offers, I raised my paddle. 100,000, gasps. The room turned. My father stood up abruptly, trying to signal the auctioneer to skip the item, but it was too late. The bids rose: 120, 150, 180. I stayed calm until it reached 250. Then I raised my paddle again. 300,000. Silence. The gavel struck. Sold. And just like that, I owned the symbol of everything they'd used to remind me I was less than them. Afterward, reporters approached wanting quotes, photos, statements about the inspiring story of resilience. I obliged gracefully. I knew the coverage would run by morning, framing me as the successful daughter returning with purpose and dignity, the same narrative my family had tried to erase. My mother approached me as I left, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" I asked softly. "Standing on my own?" Her eyes filled with tears. "You're humiliating your father." "No," I said, stepping closer. "He did that himself the moment he decided power was worth more than love." Evan appeared beside her, furious. "You've ruined everything." I tilted my head. "No, Evan, I've just rewritten the story. The one where I'm not the failure, but the one who finally stopped pretending." As I turned to leave, flashes went off again, cameras capturing what looked like a reconciliation scene. To the public, I was a poised success story. To my family, a living reminder of every lie they'd told to keep me small. Back in the car, I looked out the window at the glowing ballroom behind me. My phone buzzed, a flood of messages, congratulations, connection requests, even from people who'd ignored me for years. And then, one final text from my father. "You've made your point. Come home, let's talk." I typed slowly, fingers steady. "I already am home. I just had to build it myself." I hit send, then turned off my phone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was victory. They wanted me invisible. Instead, I became unforgettable. The days following the gala felt strangely quiet, like the air after a storm. My name was everywhere. Interviews, articles, social media posts framing me as a self-made comeback story. I should have felt euphoric, triumphant even. But instead, I felt still. Not empty, not regretful, just aware. Revenge had a way of clarifying things. The satisfaction was real, but so was the cost. I'd spent so many years wanting to be seen by my family, and now that they finally looked at me, all I could see was how small their world had always been. Evan called once. The conversation was awkward, polite, careful. He tried to sound casual, asking if we could start over. I told him I didn't hate him, but I wasn't ready to pretend nothing had happened. "I don't need an apology," I said. "I just need you to stop rewriting what you did." He didn't know how to respond. For the first time, silence was my boundary, not his weapon. My mother sent flowers, white lilies, her old symbol of peace. I appreciated the gesture, even if it came wrapped in guilt. My father never called, not once, and that, somehow, was the easiest part to accept. I wasn't angry anymore. I just understood him. A man terrified of losing control. Too proud to realize he already had. At work, everything blossomed. Opportunities expanded. Invitations poured in. I'd built something that didn't depend on their approval, and that realization was intoxicating. Power, I learned, wasn't loud. It was quiet consistency, the ability to choose your reactions, to walk away instead of explain. Yet some nights, lying awake, I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who waited for phone calls, approval, crumbs of affection. I wanted to tell her she'd done enough, that her worth was never conditional. Maybe that was the real revenge, healing into someone they couldn't define anymore. Leah teased me once, saying I'd won the family game. I smiled but shook my head. "No," I told her. "I stopped playing." Because in truth, revenge hadn't given me closure, self-respect had. And maybe that was the quietest kind of justice there is. If you'd told me a year ago that everything would unravel, that my own parents would tell me to take a step back, I would have sworn I'd never recover. Back then, I believed family was supposed to be the safest place. I thought love meant loyalty, and loyalty meant being chosen. But now, I understand that sometimes love is learning when to stop begging for a seat at a table that was never built for you. I spent years shrinking myself, trying to earn warmth from people who only offered it when it suited them. Every success I had, they turned into a threat. Every mistake, a reason to whisper. And for the longest time, I thought if I worked harder, smiled wider, forgave faster, they'd finally see me. But the truth was simple and cruel. They already did. They just didn't want me to outshine them. Revenge taught me something strange. It isn't about payback. It's about perspective. I thought exposing their hypocrisy would heal me. Instead, it showed me how small their world was, how fragile their pride had always been. I didn't win by proving them wrong. I won by no longer needing to. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. Sometimes it means releasing the version of yourself that waited for them to care. I still think about my mother's lilies, my father's silence, my brother's half-hearted text. Not with anger anymore, but with distance. They're part of my story, not my identity. There's a strange peace in realizing you can love people from afar, without letting them break you again. I don't hate my family. I don't even pity them. I just wish they'd learned sooner that power doesn't come from control. It comes from integrity. And to anyone watching this who's ever been the outsider, the disappointment, the too much one, hear me when I say this. You are not defined by who walked away. You are built by who you became in their absence. I used to think closure would feel like applause. It doesn't. It feels like quiet, like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. So no, this isn't a story about revenge anymore. It's about reclamation, of worth, of peace, of self. Because sometimes the best justice isn't watching them fall. It's standing tall and realizing you never needed them to catch you.